Sometimes the worst lies are told to the people preparing to love you most. I met Rachel during a hospital charity event. She was a nurse, I was a civil engineer consulting on their new wing expansion. She had this way of making everyone around her feel seen, patients, coworkers, even the guy in the corner reviewing blueprints. We dated for 8 months before I proposed. A year later, we were married. 2 years after that, she told me she was pregnant. I remember exactly where I was standing when she showed me the test. Our kitchen by the window that overlooked the small garden she'd been trying to start. She was crying happy tears and I picked her up and spun her around like we were in some movie. We called our parents. We started talking about names. We cleared out the spare bedroom that same weekend. The first trimester was rough on her, morning sickness that lasted all day. I'd wake up early to make her ginger tea before work, keep crackers on her nightstand, rearrange my schedule to drive her to appointments. Her mom joked that I was more excited than Rachel was. Maybe I was. I'd always wanted to be a father. Around week 14, things got strange. Rachel started working longer shifts. She'd always been dedicated to her job, but suddenly she was volunteering for overtime, picking up weekends, staying late for charting. When I'd ask about it, she'd say they were short-staffed. The hospital was always short-staffed, so it made sense. But something felt different. She became protective of her phone. Not in an obvious way, she didn't change her password or hide her screen. But she started keeping it face down on surfaces. She'd take it with her to the bathroom, to the laundry room, places she never used to. When it buzzed during dinner, she'd glance at it and say it was work, then not check it until later when she thought I wasn't looking. I'm not naturally suspicious. I wanted to believe everything was fine, but I'm an engineer, I notice patterns. I notice when things don't line up. One night in her second trimester, she came home at midnight from what was supposed to be an 8-hour shift. She was showered, her hair was still damp. I asked her why she'd showered at work and she said she'd spilled something on herself in the ER. The explanation was reasonable, but she'd been working postpartum that week, not emergency. I didn't say anything. 2 weeks later, I woke up at 3 a.m. and she wasn't in bed. I found her in the living room on her phone typing something. The screen light made her face look different, guilty maybe, or sad. When she noticed me, she locked the phone quickly and said she couldn't sleep, that the baby was kicking. I sat with her for 20 minutes. She barely said a word. The doubt started eating at me. I'd look at her across the dinner table, this woman I'd married who was carrying what I thought was our child, and wonder if I even knew her anymore. I hated myself for thinking it. What kind of person suspects their pregnant wife of cheating? What kind of husband doesn't trust the mother of his child? But the patterns kept adding up. I found a receipt in her purse while looking for grocery money she'd mentioned leaving there. Dinner at a restaurant downtown. 2 entrees, 2 drinks, one was a mocktail, which made sense for her, but still. The date was a Thursday, a day she told me she was working late. When I asked her about it casually, she said she'd grabbed food with Kennedy, another nurse. I called it reasonable and dropped it, but I didn't forget. At her 20-week anatomy scan, something shifted in me. We were in the ultrasound room and the technician was showing us the baby's profile, the tiny hands, the heartbeat. Rachel was crying again, squeezing my hand. I was staring at that screen, at that little person we'd created, and all I could think was, what if it's not mine? The thought made me feel sick, but once it was there, I couldn't unthink it. I started looking into paternity testing. I learned you could do it before birth, non-invasive prenatal paternity testing. It required a blood sample from the mother and a cheek swab from the potential father. It was expensive, around $800, but accurate as early as 7 weeks into pregnancy. We were well past that. The problem was getting Rachel's blood sample. I couldn't exactly ask her for one, but she was a nurse. She had regular appointments. And I knew from going with her to her checkups that they drew her blood periodically, iron levels, glucose screening, the usual pregnancy monitoring. I made a decision I'm still not proud of. At her next OB appointment, I went with her like always. While she was in the exam room, I waited in the hall. When she came out, she mentioned they'd drawn blood for her glucose test. I acted supportive, asked if she was okay, all the normal things. But I'd noticed which lab they used, the hospital system's own processing center. I work with contractors from all kinds of fields. One of them has a brother-in-law who works in medical logistics. I won't detail how I managed it, but 2 weeks later I had what I needed. A small vial that had been marked for disposal after testing. Enough for what I had to do. I sent everything to a private lab 3 states away. The waiting period was 7 to 10 business days. Those were the longest days of my life. Rachel hit her 3rd trimester. We took maternity photos. We assembled the crib together. Her parents threw her a baby shower. I smiled through all of it, played the excited father-to-be, and felt like I was living in 2 different realities. In one, I was preparing to meet my son or daughter. In the other, I was waiting for confirmation that my entire life was a lie. The results came back on a Tuesday. I was at work when the email arrived. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and opened it on my phone. The report was clinical, full of genetic markers and probability percentages. But the conclusion was simple: probability of paternity, 0%. I stared at that number until my eyes blurred. 0%, not my child, not my blood. The baby she was carrying, the one I'd been preparing for, talking to, imagining a future with it, belonged to someone else. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there numb, watching people walk past my truck, going about their normal days. My hands were shaking. I thought about Rachel at home, probably folding baby clothes or reading one of those pregnancy books. I thought about the nursery we'd painted together. I thought about every moment of the last 7 months and realized it had all been built on a lie. I drove home in a fog. I didn't know what I was going to do. Confront her, leave, scream, shut down. All I knew was that I needed to see her face and figure out if the woman I married was still in there somewhere. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, making herself a snack. 7 months pregnant, glowing the way people said pregnant women do. She smiled when she saw me. "You're home early," she said. "Everything okay?" I set my keys down on the counter. I pulled the printed lab report from my jacket pocket and placed it in front of her. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. She looked at the paper. I watched her face change, confusion, then recognition, then pure terror. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's a paternity test," I said. "And before you ask how I got it, don't just tell me the truth, Rachel." She started crying immediately, not the gentle tears from the ultrasounds. These were the kind of sobs that shake your whole body. She sank into a chair, covering her face. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry." I didn't move. I just stood there waiting. It took her 10 minutes to get the words out. His name was Adrian, another nurse at the hospital. It had started 8 months ago, before she got pregnant. She'd tried to end it when she found out about the baby, but it hadn't stopped cleanly. She didn't know for sure whose child it was, so she'd just hoped, prayed, convinced herself it had to be mine because the alternative was too terrible. "I wanted it to be yours," she said, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I wanted this family. I wanted us. But you didn't stop sleeping with him," I said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I asked her if she loved him. She said she didn't know. I asked her if she'd ever planned to tell me. She said no. I asked her what she expected would happen when the baby was born and looked nothing like me. She said she hadn't thought that far ahead. That's what broke me, not the cheating, not the pregnancy, but the complete lack of planning. She just hoped it would work out. She'd gambled with my entire life and didn't even have a contingency. I told her I wanted her out of the house by the end of the week. She begged, she pleaded. She said she'd do anything, go to therapy, cut off contact with Adrian, raise the baby together anyway. I told her the baby wasn't mine to raise. It wasn't my responsibility. She'd made that decision the moment she'd slept with someone else. She called her mother that night. I heard her on the phone, sobbing, trying to explain. I didn't listen to the whole conversation. I went to the nursery and stood in the doorway, looking at the crib, the changing table, the little clothes hanging in the closet. Well, if it meant for someone else's child, Rachel moved in with her parents 4 days later. I helped her pack because despite everything, I'm not cruel. She cried the entire time. I didn't. 2 months later, she gave birth. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't ask for updates. I heard through mutual friends that Adrian was there, that he'd signed the birth certificate, that they were trying to make it work. I filed for divorce while she was still in the hospital. It was finalized 8 weeks later. No contest, no custody battle, clean break. Some people asked me if I regretted getting the test, if maybe ignorance would have been better. I tell them no. I'd rather live in a painful truth than a comfortable lie. I'd rather know I dodged a lifetime of raising another man's child while being betrayed in my own home. Do I still think about it? Of course, I think about what that kid looks like now. I think about the version of my life where I never found out, where I just believed her and kept going. Sometimes I wonder if I could have been happy in that delusion, but then I remember standing in that kitchen, watching her face as she realized I knew, and I remember thinking she would have let me believe it forever. She would have let me cut the umbilical cord, sign the birth certificate, wake up for night feedings, pay for diapers, all while knowing I was living a lie. That's not love, that's not family, that's cruelty disguised as hope. I sold the house 6 months after the divorce. Too many memories. Too many ghosts in the nursery. I moved across town, started over, focused on my work, started dating again carefully. I'm not broken, I'm just more careful now. And sometimes when I'm alone, I think about that paternity test, about the moment I decided to find out the truth instead of just trusting. Best decision I ever made.